Okay, so I see that we're live and we can slowly start our interesting discussion. I'm sure about that. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion devoted to social entrepreneurship and impact investment in Eurasia. And well, during the last years, we hear more and more, like about the impact investing. What is it? What is social impact investment? And we will discuss during the course of this conversation about what is it, like how should we anticipate it, what can we do to increase this impact provided by the investments. But before we kick off our discussion, I'd like to name 3 reasons. Of course, there are much more. Why do we talk about impact investments these days, these years? But I'd like to focus on 3. To my mind, one of the reasons is of course, I think we have the problem with my microphone. Sorry for that.
Olga, we can hear you. I can hear you perfectly clear.
Okay. Sorry, I just received a comment. So continuing, yeah. And so, why impact investment these days? According to my thoughts, reason number one is of course all the processes, all the events that are happening in the world, from the pandemics, from the inequality that we are having. One, people have easy access to medicine and to vaccination, for example, during the times of coronavirus pandemics. We have other events like force majeures and natural catastrophes, which we cannot just, overcome just with the forces of government or with the social society movements. Reason number 2 is, of course, the development of technology. We now realize that technology is not only about, scrolling the iPhones or Android phones and playing some games or doing some funny stuff, but tech is also for good. And this is very important. And the reason number 3, which I would like to stress, is the transfer of wealth to the categories which are underrepresented historically, which are women and millennials. And for these categories, I can speak on behalf of one of the category as a woman and probably a millennial as well. For these categories, making an impact is as important as making profits, maybe even much more important, to not only create businesses, create different projects and so on, but to change the world, to bring more people to, to equality and to create the better world itself. And these are the topics that we will talk today. I will represent the speakers that we will have, then I will represent myself, and then I'm happy to pass the word to each of our distinguished panelists to share about their activities and their thoughts, general helicopter view thoughts on the theme that we're discussing today. So today we will have Olesea Ghedrovici, the Senior Economic Policy Advisor to the Moldovan government at GIZ. We will also have a discussion with Jeffrey Liebert, the CEO of Gazelle Finance, and my old friend and colleague, Roman Zinchenko, the co-founder of Greencubator and the head of Energy Committee at Ukrainian Venture Capital Association. And of course, myself, I'm talking a bit too long now, but just briefly representing myself. So I'm Olga Afanasyeva, and recently, I have joined the team of the big tech company originated in Ukraine called ELEKS as the head of Kyiv Branch Office, where 2,000 people across the globe with clients in the Western world mostly, with the focus on producing different types of technology, including the technology for good, for increasing the CSR and so on. Maybe I will talk about this later. In my previous part of life, it still continues, but more in non-executive role. I was the CEO of Ukrainian Venture Capital and Private Equity Association, where I shifted to the role of honorary member and the co-chair of research committee. And impact investing is always have been the big part of my professional activity, as well as I was one of the organizers of Ukrainian House in Davos alongside the World Economic Forum and supporting Ukrainian get startups to be represented and included in the global technology scene, for example, at this Consumer Electronics Show, it's famous CES, and many others. But enough for myself. I'd like to pass the word to Olesea Ghedrovici, who represents GIZ in Moldova. Please tell about yourself in context of our topic and your high-level thoughts on the on today's issue. Thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you, Olga. There were some issues with internet connection. Sorry for that. So I work for the GIZ Moldova. Our project is named Economic Policy Advice to the Moldovan government. So we work with the Moldovan government in providing support for the elaboration of policies which are targeting sustainable economic growth and inclusive economic growth. So of course, social entrepreneurship in this regard is one of the hot topics which appeared in the agenda of our government, and especially Ministry of Economy and Infrastructure, with which we are very closely working. So the intervention of our project was multilateral, I would say. So we provide capacity building activities. We also supported development of a series of regulations, and we continue now with providing support in elaboration of the national programs for the development of social entrepreneurship. So this is briefly maybe.
Olesea, thank you. We will continue later. I'd like to pass the word to Jeffrey Liebert, the CEO of Gazelle Finance.
Thank you, Olga. I appreciate that. So Jeff Liebert, I'm the CEO of Gazelle Finance. We're an American fund manager. We manage impact investment funds in Eurasia. Our first fund is in Georgia and Armenia. We manage about $31 million, mostly DFI investors, but also local sovereign investors. And as an impact fund, we have a dual objective. One is financial returns for our investors, and two is to achieve a few specific impact indicators for the local economies we work in. And I think the key one is employment. We want to build strong, viable companies. The word Gazelle means companies that grow at 20% per annum. And they're really the primary employment driver in countries like Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, countries that don't have a lot of oil and gas, and where you have that sort of top-down, state-owned enterprise, subsidies coming into the market. You really depend on the bottoms-up type entrepreneurialism that you have to develop. And in the former Soviet Union, that's been difficult, to go through that sort of cycle of new sort of thinking and way of doing business, from a command economy to a capitalist economy. And so we've been in Georgia and Armenia for the last 4 years, and I think we've invested in about 35 companies, created over 1,500 jobs. But over the course of our business, we started to track some other impact indicators and focus on those as well. And one of them is gender lens investing. We've been very successful at finding strong female entrepreneurs, and whether they're the leaders or the owners in the business, we kind of look at them the same as, are we finding businesses that have strong female leadership, or are we finding businesses that are owned, at least partially, by women? And I think we're somewhere between 20–30% of our portfolio, which is a pretty big deal in our space. And the other one that we track very closely and focus on very closely, which I think is good for business for us, is to get out of the city. So, Kyiv, Tbilisi, Yerevan, those are the dominant economic forces in the respective countries. So the challenge is, can you get out of those? Can you get out of those countries, out of those the big cities, and get out into the regions? And so that's something we've been focused on, and we're almost at 50% of our portfolio. So those are three, primary impact indicators that we look for. Youth is another one we track somewhat. But in the end, our primary focus is first to make money and make money by doing good. And by doing good, that achieves the impact that we want to achieve.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for sharing that. I'll get back about, earning money and making good as well. And now I'd like to pass the word to Roman Zinchenko, who is the co-founder of the Greencubator.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, everybody. Well, a lot of inspiring work is done by your teams. So, like, when I'm thinking about the impact and social investing and social ventures, I'm actually thinking we're in the right company and we're in the right sector, because like Greencubator is clearly focusing on tackling climate issues and creating technologies that are not in the spectrum. Okay, let's be less evil corporate, but we are focusing on the businesses that are creating the value both for humanity and for ecosystem, and that are helping to challenge the assumption that the classical business model should be destructive for businesses. And Olga, I don't know if you have noticed, but today celebrates the 4 years since we gathered together in the UVCA organized then Climate Launchpad gathering, which actually brought to the life a number of clean tech startups like EFA and Go2You, and that is actually the part of our job. So Greencubator has been in the market for supporting clean tech and environmental innovators for over 12 years now. We are running programs focusing on entrepreneurship and sustainable development within the corporate sector. We pioneered some of the programs to help corporates to transition the business models to the greener segment, but our priority is startups. So we've been doing startups focused programs since our early days, and it's really great to see them grow now and raise investments and go global. So like now we are scaling from being Ukrainian organization, Ukrainian ecosystem builder to regional ecosystem builder. We are operator for the Ukraine's, and now not just Ukraine's, but the regional's largest clean tech support program initiated by EBRD and funded by European Union. It's called Climate Innovation Vouchers. So the second installment of this program is already in Belarus. We are running the project both in Ukraine, Belarus, and starting the feasibility study for Georgia soon. And there is one important challenge we are also working to solve, is that our region, the region of Eastern Partnership, Moldova, Belarus, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, for many players in the field, we are invisible. We are not on the charts. So that's why we are working on the mainstreaming of the region and mainstreaming of the trend. And probably by the end of the autumn, we will have the research about the biggest impact sector, which is climate sector, and the climate sector within this region. And what I'm also really passionate about, that over the course of this decade, we see a really interesting shift in the gender composition. We have a growing sector of female founders and female-led teams, and we were so happy to do the conference called Celebrating Women in Ukrainian Clean Tech. Probably next year we're going to repeat that. And one of the projects we are onboarding is actually so this 5-year startup-centric projects for the clean tech, has a direct requirement of 30% female founders and leaders, and we are already beating that. So that makes me especially happy and proud as the father of 2 daughters. And yeah, I believe that we have a hidden gem here. We are a very interesting region with a lot of similarities and the huge hidden need for new technologies. And what is important is just having patience. And from our perspective, when we were starting in the sector of clean tech and climate innovations, everybody was saying, okay, you're crazy, this is never going to happen here. Then Ukraine adopted the incentive schemes for the green investments, and people started telling you knew something, tell us you knew something. And then, well, things are changing, and still we just keep doing the same thing. So for the social impact ventures, for me, what is the most important is that your patience is over a decade. So if you are capable to spend over the decade, you can actually achieve the changes in the market. So in my view, our biggest change is actually the entrepreneurs that are created. And it's someday we would be able to say, yes, this market was created and is helping tackling global problems. So thank you, Olga, for touching that.
Thanks for sharing, Roman. And yeah, I saw on Facebook the reminder that exactly 4 years ago, four years ago, there was the boot camp for clean tech startups. And since then, every year, I'm following this activity, which is inspiring, and we see already the results and the new, like rounds of fundraising of startups in clean tech from the international financial institutions, from VCs and so on, which was not the case like several years ago when it all started like in that scale. Yeah.
May I share development? We've just been approved as the organizer of the regional final for the Eastern Europe and Greater Middle East.
Okay, so that's one of the aims that was there. This for 2021, right?
Yeah.
Congratulations! That's huge.
So this is about uniting the region, and it's important that we are developing this region and uncovering a lot more clean tech talents here. Yeah, which is like one of the most important directions of the impact investing. So and like continuing talking about the impact investing, maybe let's like have a short kind of stop on understanding and discussing what is impact investing, because sometimes impact investing can be, because of the word impact, can be confused on like charity activity or philanthropic activity, though like according to the terminology, let's say, or methodology of the GEAN, like Global Impact Investing Network that works in this sphere, they distinguish the range of indicators which help to define the efficiency of investment, of impact investment. And they are grouped in two blocks. First is the impact efficiency, and the second is financial efficiency. So when we're talking about impact investing, we don't eliminate the part where there are profits, basically, when there is financial profit for the company or for its investor. Maybe you have some comments on these, like basic things. I know that Jeffrey was making a comment while we were preparing to the panel about the difference of impact investing and social impact investing. So if you would like to add something about that, this is the right time, please.
Is this me or Olesea that starts? I will start.
I think you.
All right, then it'll be me. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the hardest things to do is in finance is to determine what is an appropriate profit, from an investment, and and it's interesting, Roman was talking about clean tech. When I was at IFC, we started one of the first emerging market clean tech venture funds. And we always struggled with what is clean tech. And the definition was always moving, because if you move from coal to natural gas, it's a huge climate change benefit. If you decommission a coal-fired power plant and turn it into a natural gas-fired power plant. And so, it was always a challenge for us, and this is the same thing with impact investing. Is that there is a sort of a bell curve of high impact, high return, and somewhere in the middle is decent impact and decent return, and sometimes they diverge. And so when it comes to private capital markets, you do have to offer an appropriate return to your investors. And at a certain point, if you get too far from what is considered that risk-reward ratio, then you have to start using money that is more benevolent in nature. And so to me, it's often driven by other people's money, whether it's from private foundations, it's from bilaterals. I mean, I heard Roman talking about EBRD and EU, right? So when I go to EBRD or I go to IFC, they're not willing to compromise financial returns, but they still want the impact, right? And so this is where, for me, it sort of ends. I can't go beyond a certain threshold when it comes to those financial returns. So then who's going to fix, those other issues? Well, it's not going to be me, because I have a certain return that I'm obligated to provide to my investors. And I can't tell you it's completely science, right? Is it 12% that I have to give an investor versus 8% versus 18%? And this is where it gets kind of dicey. But I really don't think that there is a fine line. It's actually a pretty big gray area that we have to operate in when we're doing impact investing, and then we intersect with you know, as Roman said, sort of 10-year type time horizons. That's a long time. You know, I can't necessarily give 10 years often to my investees, right? So that may knock me out of a certain sort of subset where more patient capital is required.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I see the hand of Roman.
Yeah, if I may, Jeffrey, thank you. You actually make very solid point. And this is the combination of two approaches, because the way, for example, EBRD is recruiting us, the job we are doing for them is actually mitigating some of the risks. So the job we are doing, we are scouting for clean tech ventures, and some of them they are ready to consider through more conservative look as a part of their venture approach or their loan products. But they are asking us to scout this market, to distribute the small grants, not of your check size, but smaller check size. But this is a big impact on the local market in terms of creating the flow of the entrepreneurs willing to dive into this river and swim with this river, maybe full of crocodiles or maybe full of some nice and white lilies. I don't know. The rivers tend to be really different in different markets. So, but before we can scout the market, that's actually, you referred me back to the conversation I had earlier today with the entrepreneur doing like huge scale reforestation effort globally. So very interesting startup. So they have this nursery for trees, right? Where they're growing smaller trees. So before we can scout the markets, it's important that we are doing the nursery job, that there is a new generation of entrepreneurs ready to dive, or at least ready to drink from the river of opportunity. And this job, this nursery job, I consider to be classical social impact work. So we're helping people launch. Not all of them are surviving, but at some stage they are ready to talk bigger checks, they're ready to talk bigger investors, and they're ready to tackle bigger challenges. But before that, yeah, there is a lot of energy to be investment into making this nursery work and making them ready to talk with you within 4 or 5 years after they've been through with Olga's bootcamp some time ago.
Thanks for sharing. Olesea, do you have something to add at this point?
Yeah, I actually noticed for myself that I have very interesting colleagues in the panel, and they look at some aspects from a little bit different perspective than, for example, I look, because they are, let's say, in the practical field, so they implement the activities, and I look at those topics from the policy, from the enabling framework point of view. So when we are speaking about impact investment and social entrepreneurship, for me, impact investment looks like an instrument to implement social entrepreneurship. And then it's actually a very, I would say, already classical question for the policymakers, how to define social economy and social entrepreneurship, and which would be the criteria to define it. Because from this definition actually comes the necessity for creation of the proper legal framework, and from this definition and criteria came the necessity to create different incentives or support schemes from the government. So it's a very important topic how to define. I know that different countries solved it in a different way, and in the Eastern Partnership there are different views on this topic. Just recently, on 27th of May, we managed to organize a dedicated panel within the European Social Economy Summit. I think you know about this big European event, and we had panelists, policymakers from Eastern Partnership countries. And it was interesting to observe how actually the understanding of the importance of the sector and the incentives and the legal framework differs from country to country. So I think this actually is a key question and very important one.
Thank you for sharing.
Can I just interrupt one thing? And I think it's something that hasn't been stated, but I think is implied here, is the region, which I keep finding it's quite interesting. Is, when I went to raise money for the region, One of my biggest problems is it wasn't considered a region. And I think, what Olesea and Roman and I are facing, as we try to work, whether it's in Ukraine or Moldova and Georgia and Armenia, is how do you bring these countries together that are loosely connected to, let's face it, the former Soviet Union, right? And sort of this Russian-speaking Slavic connection, right? And so whether you're in Mongolia or you're all the way out in Eastern Europe, I mean, those are like, 12 time zones, all linked to this former sort of northern neighbor, right? And our orientation is all sort of indirectly or directly linked to that. So the Eastern Partnership, which I keep hearing, which is what we've chosen to call our next fund. Our next fund is called Gazelle 2, Eastern Partnership Growth Fund. And so the Eastern Partnership, 6 countries, right? It's Belarus, it's Moldova, it's Ukraine, it's Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Now, if you take those 6 countries, right, you've got a lot of interesting dynamics between them, right? I would say that 2 are very different than 4, right? Azerbaijan and Belarus are very different from social entrepreneurship, NGO, impact investing, civil society. For example, Belarus a year ago, we were looking at very carefully, and now it's going to be very difficult for us to bring our investors into the country, right? Azerbaijan has been a no-go for a long time, largely because it's so controlled top-down that there really isn't an active civil society, and there's very little true SME entrepreneurship. And so that's limited to us to 4 countries, which is Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, and Armenia. So those are the countries that we're operating in and we're excited about. But is that a region? And I mean, I think that is something that I think is interesting about this discussion is we're talking about, think of a grid, right? We've got one part of the grid is social and impact investing. The other grid is the region that we're plugging into. And so I think we have to talk about this in the context of the region. This whole conversation really has to be considering where we're operating, because this is not Francophone Africa, right? Where every single development finance institution, many of the large family foundations like Gates Foundation are all very active. In our region, we have a much limited group of actors to work with because of the complexity of the region. And it's also, I would argue, isn't a cohesive region. It's actually quite fragmented. And so the work that we're all doing, trying to make this a region, is very much, I see the Eastern Partnership and that sort of initiative from the EU, but it's a lot of the bottoms-up grassroots stuff that's going on right here that I think is really critical, because this is a very difficult region to make a holistic sort of whole.
Yeah, thank you for the comment, Jeffrey. Just the brief comment, and I'll pass the word to Roman. I cannot agree with you more. Also, I'd like to, underline that our region of Eurasia, or like how do we call the group of our countries, are not homogeneous. Like we are not even United States of America in terms of like when the startups start operating on the market. And the other thing is that the beauty of the startups is that the geographical risk is less in that case, rather than you're like a big corporation or like, plant or whatever it is, a factory. That's a good thing about the startups, that the team is small, less linkage to the country. So they can be, more or less flexible in terms of fundraising and developing their business. Roman, the floor is yours.
Jeffrey, you actually you raised a really valid question. From our side, we just found ourselves in developing our partnership network even broader. We recently signed up a partnership with our colleagues in the sector in Kazakhstan, which is a very interesting story. But to explain you some of the connections, speaking from like Ukrainian perspective and being based in Ukraine, there is a strong sentiment and there is a strong connection between Ukraine and Georgia. Well, the same between Ukraine and Belarus. And I grew up in the region where we saw Moldova just across the bridge. So I'm coming from the part of Ukraine which is called Podillia, which is very close to Moldova. So like there is this connection. So like surely Belarus is going through really tough time. But like our priority, and the entrepreneur I was speaking today in the morning, she's actually of Azerbaijani origin, married to Ukrainian entrepreneur, and Olga, you know, both of them, I believe. The thing is, there's a lot of connection and there is a lot of invisibility combined with potential. So like you mentioned Francophone Africa, and well, the world knows a lot about Francophone Africa. Most of the clean tech ventures, most of the impact investors. So they focus on that region of Africa. Well, and we have an opportunity here. We have opportunity here, and that's not just the, so like, sure, the paths of this region moving, they are different, but I should tell you, I've been working with some of the Azerbaijani colleagues in the clean tech ecosystem development, and they were one of the most passionate and dynamic and driven teams. I know people from Moldova who are working in the sector. Wow, there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of positive dynamics. So like, my approach in this case, that like the entrepreneurs, they are everywhere. There should be soon entrepreneurs at Moon and Mars, and sure there will be Martian and Moon incubators. But still, entrepreneurship is everywhere. Somalia, there is entrepreneurship. Iran, there is entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurs, they are capable of solving problems everywhere in the world, even in the harshest environment. So yes, that's our job to serve entrepreneurs, addressing these big challenges, even in the not of the most favorable environments, while we reach the point where you're ready to come and talk with them in some like different type of investment terms. But it's really important to support entrepreneurial energy, because entrepreneurial energy is actually one of important drivers of society reinventing itself, democratizing and moving forward. So yeah, we will stick with entrepreneurs, understanding that there are challenges. So for certain reasons, I'm not traveling to some countries where I should have been traveling according to my project I'm leading, but still, I hope we will move out of Zoom and emails exchanges with our colleagues, and we'll be able to welcome each other in our cities and work together more closely and work with entrepreneurs more closely.
That's true. We all hope for that, and waiting for for the first or the second dose of vaccination to do that, like more freely. And while we're starting the discussion about the region, like region specifics of the social entrepreneurship and impact investing, let's continue this conversation. And I would like to ask Olesea, like, what is your experience in how do you define social entrepreneurship in your activity while developing the policy and implementing it? And if you could share like some experience of developing legal framework for this activity in the region, that would be very interesting to hear this.
Thank you, Olga. My favorite question. So, as I mentioned, our project is working very closely with our government in regard to enabling policy framework for social entrepreneurship. I can tell you that in the Eastern Partnership, out of the 6 countries, Moldova is actually a front runner in development of the defined legal framework. So we have a dedicated law to social entrepreneurship. We have a definition of social enterprises. And just very recently, in May this year, the government approved a specific subsidy scheme for the salary taxes for work integration social enterprises. Now the government is working on very ambitious national program for the development of social enterprises. So we are really progressing in this field. I can tell you that we have a consultant working with us from Romania, and she was even telling that our example of Moldova can be a good example for Romanian policymakers in this field, because we have very active and very inspired policymakers who are willing to promote this topic. But speaking about the region, we know that there were attempts to promote specific dedicated legal framework for the social entrepreneurship, I think in almost all countries of Eastern Partnership. So here I would underline a very strong and important voice of the private sector and civil society, because actually they are those who are pushing the government to elaborate this enabling framework. We have shared our experience with the colleagues also from other countries, and of course there is interest in Moldovan experience, and everyone was asking during, again I would mention this in this summit, how you manage to progress in this way. And then there are of course different lessons learned in this process, but I would say that the most important maybe lesson learned is that we have to bring policymakers on our side. We have to make them feel what is social entrepreneurship, what is this impact investment. So when the people are really motivated, then it's possible to make changes with them. So this is maybe the main key message that we try to also share with the colleagues in the region.
Thanks, Olesea. The question to all of you, like, what additional measures could the governments of our region of Eurasia take in order to develop the ecosystem for social entrepreneurship and impact investments? Like, what is already done and what can be done more? Like, what is lacking on the government level? Then we will discuss the non-governmental organizations' activity, like civil society as well. Any thoughts on that? I see Jeffrey.
Well, I can give it from a perspective of an investor who's sort of on the ground and dealing in two extremely heterogeneously markets, just so different, Armenia and Georgia, that are right next to each other. It's a 5-hour drive, from Tbilisi to Yerevan, and they can't be any more different. One's part of the Eurasian Economic Union, the other one is more with the EU association sort of track. Yet Armenia has tremendous dynamicism in the IT sector, for example. They've got tremendous support from the diaspora, and so they're very different than Georgia. But when you're in a country like Georgia, which has been very open, very libertarian, you have a lot more dynamicism because entrepreneurs, they do better with less regulation. And so the first step you're ever going to hear from an investor is less is more, right? Create very clear standards, clear rules, and let people do what they need to do. Because investors, particularly international institutional investors, when you think of foreign direct investment, the last thing they want is to have another layer of bureaucracy and regulations governing their money, right? Because their money is already regulated from their source, right? So if you go to the recipient country and have further layers of friction, it means more taxes usually, more bureaucracy that impedes innovation. And so, that's really critical to these countries. And you can see the difference between Georgia and Yerevan when it comes to all of the sectors. You're going to see far more dynamicism, entrepreneurial dynamicism. Whereas, in Armenia, again, they did this tremendous job with IT. Now we're looking at Ukraine, and Ukraine's a whole different, kettle of fish, because Ukraine is a huge market, right? And so people want to be in big markets. Nobody wants to be in small markets. And this is what Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia, the Eastern Partnership countries, those three countries suffer the most is size. And size matters when it comes to foreign direct investment, right? Because investors, when they bring money into a market like this, they want to see scale. They want to see opportunities. And Ukraine, has that scale. And it's probably by far the most interesting of the six because of that scale opportunity. But from a regulatory standpoint, it still has a long ways to go. We're seeing a dramatic improvement going on right now and over the past few years, enough that we're going to come to the market. And that's what's really exciting. I get to go to a market that is certainly on the rise from a regulatory standpoint and has always been an exciting opportunity from a scale standpoint, because you're not going to beat Ukraine when it comes to the region in terms of scale opportunity. And so, for us, having very clear ground rules, you want to open up the capital markets. And I think the mistake and that many of these countries make is their over-reliance on the banking system, right? The banking system is not going to solve the capital market problems. whether you're talking about social impact investing or impact investing, the banks, in our space, they are collateral driven, and they have to be collateral driven because they're managing grandmother's money. As long as you have depositors who are your grandmothers, right, they have to be hyper regulated and they have to be careful, right? But a lot of the stuff that Roman's talking about, those guys are doing innovative stuff, and the next, Facebook is not going to come from a bank. It's going to come from Roman's shop. It's going to come from my shop, right? And if we're over-regulated, then we cannot create the next Bill Gates. We cannot create the next Steve Jobs. The next Jeff Bezos is not going to come. And trust me, there is somebody in Moldova and there's somebody in Ukraine that's going to be the next Jeff Bezos. He or she's there for sure, right? And we saw this in Romania. That's it's an amazing success story. I always get the name of it, A2I Path. I can't remember, but it's this artificial intelligence startup. It's one of the most incredible venture capital stories, in the world, in the history of venture capital, right? So if that guy came from Romania, why can't that guy come from Moldova? Why can't that guy come from Ukraine? And it's because the government is not over-regulating the market. They're enabling that to occur. And the enabling environment is open, free to foreign direct investment, not preventing foreign direct investment, but enabling it and enabling the exchange of ideas. And so that incubation system that Roman's talking about, that then has to be able to match itself, not with a bank, but match itself with someone like Gazelle, right? And if you can't get that match to occur because I can't come to the market, right? Then, like a relay race, the baton doesn't get passed. The baton doesn't get passed, right? And that's where the regulators are critical. And in the smaller countries like Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia of the Eastern Partnership, it's even more critical because there's less interest in smaller countries.
Roman, thank you, Jeffrey. That's great.
Yeah, Jeffrey, thank you very much, and Olesea, thank you very much for raising the topic regarding the different aspects of the regulation. What I should bring to the point, I really love the reference towards the next Jeff Bezos. Well, I hope Jeff Bezos is safely back from space soon. But well, the reason why TransferWise was keeping their office in Cherkasy in Ukraine, so this is nice city on the bank of Dnieper River, is that CTO was not willing to move out and to move to Estonia. So TransferWise had an office for quite a long time because one of the first 10 employees and CTO of the company was here. And this is like the solving the problems by pouring entrepreneurial energy is really essential. I love the reference towards the banks should be over-regulated because they are managing grandma's money. That's essential. And still, we will have a lot of innovations in the field of climate, in the field of sustainability, in the field of social impact, not just due to the FDI, but to any investments. And what is the essential task is democratizing investments. Actually, in my country, a lot of people are, let's say, sleeping on the mattress stuff with money. So there's a lot of local capital also being able to invest. And democratizing these investments, they're also essential part for social and impact entrepreneurship. Just two cases from Ukraine. One is, so I have a friend who is a Ukrainian entrepreneur with Kazakhstan passport. His name is Dan Tonkapi. And he is doing record-winning e-bikes used by the Mexican police, piloted by American police, and they recently did a crowd investing campaign. So after they did it, they raised $3.4 million to start the local production facility for the Delfast e-bikes. So we had a conversation, we had a live interview, and I said, so what was your largest surprise? And he said, look, we were using the global crowd investing platform, Fundly or something like that, I don't remember the name. And we were expecting like the EU citizens, Americans, so like classical Anglo-Saxon markets to become our investors. You know what happened? Over 90% are Ukrainian investors in the company which is globally building e-bikes. So democratizing investments is a big story, a big thing here. Another story is the story of my brother, who is also co-founder of Greencubator. And we, several years ago, we started a spin-off which is called Solar Town. So Solar Town is classical social impact venture, because this is the municipal energy co-op. There's 93 investors with the checks like 500 euros plus invested in the solar station within the city of Slavutic. I don't know, well, I'm not sure if you know the name Slavutic, but you surely know the name Pripyat. So Slavutic was built to replace Pripyat. And this is our great partner. And so this municipal cooperative not just democratized investments by lowering the barrier for people willing to get into solar energy, they're also doing some impact investments within the cities, spinning some, I believe, 10% of their profits into grants for the city projects. So democratizing investments, sure, I know from the investor perspective, FDIs are the key, but there's also a lot of local money willing to find some proper vehicles for investing and growing the capital. So democratizing local investments is also so very, very important part to making social and impact ventures work.
I just want to say one thing, because I really agree with Roman. It's a great point. In fact, I often say, and again, I come from an institutional investment standpoint, right? So I'm organizing capital, people are putting capital in, and then I manage it and invest it, right? And so I am not the opposite of what you're talking about, but there is all kinds of organic grassroots mechanisms to bring capital to play. And the absence of angel investors, in these markets has been a real issue. And that's where the incubators and when we start seeing sort of clusters emerge and, people start saying, hey, listen, I did this, now I'm going to put my personal money into the next, venture capital opportunity. That's what's really exciting when you start seeing that sort of patrimony between, the first guy that was successful, then passing on his know-how and capital to somebody else. But from an institutional standpoint, the other, besides this democratizing local capital, is actually the pension funds. And they're going to be hugely important to the development of the Eastern Partnership countries. And being able to take the money that is being saved and not send it overseas so that a couple guys can play the stock market, New York Stock Exchange, but actually keep it locally and be able to deploy that capital locally, because that's how the capital markets in the more developed countries work, right? The largest pension funds basically control the New York Stock Exchange, right? So how do we get also the pension fund money to play? Because that's another important sort of indicator of confidence and keeping the capital local.
Yeah, that's a very important thing. We were like in UVCA several years ago. We were trying to not to tackle this problem, but like to try to understand like from what side to come to this, which obviously is a huge thing to implement for our within our country for our government. But hopefully, some developments will be made in that sense. Yeah, Roman.
I think to what Jeffrey said and to what Olesea said, there is a really important player we just briefly touched and briefly mentioned. And we should also think of the state, both of the national and local governments, as the social impact investor. Because, well, in many situations, first the state just failed to outsource some of its function to more efficient entity. And secondly, well, some of the investments, like, okay, state is building infrastructure, state is building a lot of public institutions, but the state is still failing to treat itself as the social impact investor and assess the impact of these investments. And this is a big story, because in many cases the state is capable to properly manage that task. So this is really interesting. This is really interesting dimension to measure.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, hopefully the funds will give the opportunity to tackle that. We are coming to slowly we are coming to the final of our discussion, but some of the important issues I'd like to talk about are, so we discussed what can governments do, but it's also important to remember that if we're talking about maybe not Eurasia, but for example, Ukraine, the main initiative for building the innovative and ecosystem to building startups and supporting this sphere is coming not from the top, not from the government, but from civil society. These are entrepreneurs itself, these are non-governmental organizations, and then to them stick the Western financial organizations who understand the necessity of development of the industry as well as the big corporations. Yeah, like in Ukraine, the support of big corporation is not really the widespread case, but I hope we're moving to that. And while preparing to this discussion, I read very simple but very precise quote from the C-level manager of a huge impact investment asset management company, who said that you need the big players spending the big dollars to help educate the market. And in that sense, both corporations as well as Western financial organizations become this important, let's call them big guys, who are developing this ecosystem and impact investing. What, according to your vision, can be the role of Western financial organization and development institutions in the development of impact investment as well as social entrepreneurship in general in our region? Maybe someone want to share the thoughts. Jeffrey, maybe you can elaborate like more of your plans in the region, like how would you like to proceed further here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's Roman made a point that there's entrepreneurs in every country, whether it's, the more difficult ones like Belarus, which has become difficult recently. I mean, Belarus was producing world-class companies and really exciting opportunities. And you could see, private capital, even a private equity fund actually launched there called Zuber Capital. So they were attracting capital. I mean, I haven't seen much private equity activity in Azerbaijan, but the other 4 countries of the Eastern Partnership, I think there's a lot of interest in institutional investors. But the institutional investors tend to be the multilaterals and the bilaterals that have a mandate. And to me, that's the next evolution. How do you get from the mandate investors to the pension fund money, the more institutional private capital? I mean, that's, we saw Horizon has raised some money from institutional capital outside the DFIs, and that's nice. But there hasn't been a lot of real private institutional capital that has flown and stayed, come in and stayed in this region. And so I do think it places a really heavy burden on the DFIs because they have to be, the first movers. And that's not always what the DFIs want to be. The EBRDs and IFCs, sometimes they're looking for that catalytic role to bring the private sector in, and sometimes it's still not ready, right? And so they still have to take a heavier burden. And for countries like Ukraine right now, and Moldova, I mean, Moldova has been just a great success story for the last couple of years, and I remember when we launched Gazelle, we were looking at Moldova, and the year before, 6 months before we were launched, $1 billion just got drained from the entire capital system. And I'll tell you what happened. There was still lots of money in the banking sector, right? And there was money that wanted to go out, but the entrepreneurial confidence left the country, right? So there was no entrepreneurs that wanted to take your money, even though there was money to be provided, right? And that's now completely different, right? Fast forward, 3 years, 4 years ago, Moldova is doing really well. Great governance, great leadership. The central bank stepped in with some of the banks and fixed a lot of the problems. The banking sector was a disaster, and they fixed it. And so it can just happen overnight. I mean, not overnight, but it can happen and happen dramatically, right? And so my takeaway is that the DFIs have to be more aggressive in this region because they're absolutely critical to creating confidence. And so to me, that they're a key player, and there's an overweighted burden on their shoulders.
Yeah, right, Jeffrey. Olesea, maybe you maybe you have something to add about the evolving role of GIZ in particular in that sense.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeff, for so inspiring words about Moldova. Indeed, good things are happening here, and I think even more great things will happen. You mentioned that actually regarding the regulation, the less is actually more. It's not always like that, because regulation is not about something bad. Regulation is about creation of rules clear for everyone, and then it's about balancing the regulation. For example, now Moldova is working on elaboration of the dedicated regulation to crowdfunding. This does not mean that this will limitate the players on this market, but this will create conditions that would actually help develop the crowdfunding market. We have very interesting initiatives related to angels investors, which are also supported by our project. So many interesting things are happening. We are really trying to promote Moldova really as a front runner in the region in this field. So I will be happy maybe to collaborate with you in future if there is interest in that regard, and really advertise for my country. Thank you.
That's great. That's great to see, like, collaboration is starting to roll in here as well. We have the last 3 minutes, and as the final notes, I'd like to ask you to have one final comment to our audience. I'm assuming that the representative of international financial institutions, entrepreneurs, and maybe government officials from the region are watching us, or will watch us, and will watch this recording. So, like, short final address or statement that you would like to express to them, like, to wrap up our today's conversation, or maybe the call to action, like whatever you'd like to share.
I'll start. You know, I think Roman's point about money sitting in the mattress is a good one, and we call that monetary overhang. There's a fair amount of liquidity that has nowhere to go, and in this region. And when I see GDP per capita, you know, it's interesting. You look at GDP per capita, it's somewhere for a lot of these countries, and not Azerbaijan, but in the $4,000 range, right? And you look at what happened with the pandemic, and yet we're still seeing a fair amount of liquidity in the market. And to me, you know, this is a regional problem, right? Is that these countries want to be part of a greater region. And there is capital in the market. It's, you know, whether it's remittances or it is just existing capital in the market. And so these countries are, I would say, well, I'm going to use an American sporting metaphor, it may not work, but punching below their level, right? These countries should be actually, you know, heavyweight fighters, because they are right on the border of Europe and EU. There is tremendous intellectual capacity in these countries. The education levels are extremely high. The legacy systems, you know, have had their problems, but they're really quite good. And that's why we do see great IT, you know, clusters emerging in Kharkiv and Lviv and Yerevan. And so the human potential, human capital, it's not a 4,000 GDP per capita countries. These should be 6, 7, 8,000. And rising. And so I actually think that the GDP per capita is underreported somehow. And that's why I think you're going to see some real opportunities emerge, because it just takes, you know, one great story to emerge, like we saw in Romania recently, that can be a game changer for an entire industry. So, I mean, I'm really bullish. And, you know, the more integration between the region that we can get, the better. Because it's rising tides lifts all boats. It's a saying that matters for this region. You know, it's what helps Moldova helps Georgia. What helps Armenia helps Ukraine. It makes the region stronger.
Thanks, Jeff. Great. Roman, microphone.
Since you've suggested addressing governments, well, I would just address corporates and governments. As we are building the pipeline of those creating impact ventures and sustainable ventures and climate positive ventures, dear corporates and dear governments, please take the note that your purchasing power is actually the biggest investor and the best investor for any type of sustainable and impact startup is just paying customers. Be paying customers and you create new beautiful industries. Thank you.
Thanks, Roman. That's beautiful. Olesea, do you have something to add, please?
Yeah, maybe my last message would be really to create collaborations, to create networks, because this was the second important lesson that we learned in the process of development of social economy and social entrepreneurship. So it's important really to build those networks and work together for the common purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Olesea. Thanks. I cannot agree with you more as well. My final comment would be that, like, my personal belief is that within the next 10 years, due to the direction where the world is moving, businesses as well as the European regulation in particular, the majority of venture capital investments and private equity investments would be with the impact component. And remembering this, I encourage entrepreneurs to think not only about gaining the immediate, profits for the next few years, but think about long-term profits for all the society, for the environment and the climate, and for investors also to take care and to take into account this point in particular while making the investment decision during your activity. So this was the panel about social entrepreneurship and impact investments in Eurasia. I thank Jeffrey, Olesea, and Roman for this meaningful discussion, and it was very, very interesting to hear your concerns and your points of view. Hope to meet again in the similar composition, and probably some partnerships will arise from our today's meeting. Have a nice rest of the day, and good luck. Impact to everyone.